Today we are working on Psalm 50. Now, Psalm 50 has a variety of uses. A lot of times we use it for healing, but today we are going to be using it for transformation, for turning a situation around. So if there's a situation that's not so hot in your life, you can work this psalm to transform it, to change the base metal into gold, to actually turn the situation around into something wonderful. And the way we work psalm magic is very simple and highly effective. We take the psalm in question and we speak it out loud as an incantation all the way through once. Then we go back through that psalm and we take it verse by verse, and we consider the inner occult meanings that we find in each verse. And we view these inner occult meanings as magic seeds. And there are an infinite amount of magic seeds in any given psalm. We'll never find them all. But it's through this searching and digging, contemplating, and then applying what we find to the situation at hand that in a real way we are taking those seeds that we find and planting them deeply in the fertile grounds of our mind, where they take root and they grow, they blossom forth, and then they bear fruit after their kind. And that is exactly what you and I are going to do together right now with Psalm 50. The mighty God, even the Lord, hath spoken, and called the earth from the rising of the sun unto the going down thereof. Out of Zion the perfection of beauty God hath shined. Our God shall come, and shall not keep silence. A fire shall devour before him, and it shall be very tempestuous round about him. And he shall call to the heavens from above, and to the earth, that he may judge his people. Gather my saints together unto me, those that have made a covenant with me by sacrifice, and the heavens shall declare his righteousness, for God is judge himself. Selah. Hear my people, and I will speak, O Israel, and I will testify against thee. I am God, even thy God. I will not reprove thee for thy sacrifices, or thy burnt offerings to have been continually before me. I will take no bullock out of thy house, nor he-goats out of thy folds, for every beast of the forest is mine, and the cattle upon 1,000 hills. I know all the fowls of the mountains, and the wild beasts of the field are mine. If I were hungry, I would not tell thee, for the world is mine, and the fullness thereof. Will I eat the flesh of bulls, or drink the blood of goats? Offer unto God thanksgiving, and pay thy vows unto the Most High, and call upon me in the day of trouble. I will deliver thee, and thou shalt glorify me. But unto the wicked God saith, What hast thou to do to declare my statutes, or that thou shouldest take my covenant in thy mouth? Seeing thou hatest instruction, and casteth my words behind thee. When thou sawest a thief, then thou contentest with him, and hast been partaker with adulterers. Thou givest thy mouth to evil, and thy tongue frameth deceit. Thou sittest and speakest against thy brother. Thou slanderest thine own mother's son. These things hast thou done, and I kept silence. Now thou thoughtest that I was altogether such an one as thyself. But I will reprove thee, and set them in order before thine eyes. Now consider this, ye that forget God, lest I tear you into pieces, and there be none to deliver. Whoso offer praise glorifieth me, and to him that ordereth his conversation aright, I will show the salvation of God. My goodness, what a psalm that is. Let's get to work. It starts out it's interesting. In the King James Version, they give us a little different opening than if you look at it just in Hebrew. In Hebrew, it says, El, Elohim, and Yahweh hath spoken. It's given 3 names of God. Now, in the King James Version, it says, the mighty God, even the Lord hath spoken. So, this psalm is probably one of those that really dates back to an ancient mythology that has been somewhat forgotten and maybe not even properly translated. So a lot of these really ancient old psalms were taken most assuredly from a more ancient mythology and then reappropriated according to the theology of the ancient Hebrew religion that was still forming, by the way. But anyway, so basically when you're saying the mighty God, even the Lord hath spoken, when you're naming all those gods, you're naming every possible iteration of the infinite that you can think of. And so basically we're saying, I don't care what you call it, but infinite intelligence hath spoken. Now, let's look at the Lord, let's look at God, let's look at what these words mean for us as magicians, as psalm magicians. They're not deities that we're supplicating to and hoping to get favor. We're aligning ourselves with the one force of the entire universe. There's one power, there's one force, there's one source, there's one substance in all the universe. The closest thing that we've come to it in our day and age is the Star Wars movies, where they talk about the Force. And that's really what God is. That's really what the Lord is. It's a pre-gender force. And there's only one. And since there's only one, there's nothing to oppose it. And when we say, if God be for us, who can be against us? Or we say one with God is a majority, we are meaning that in a very literal sense. And that's the power of psalm magic, is that it reminds us that there is only one. So it says that this one force has spoken and called the earth from the rising of the sun unto the going down thereof. God speaks and calls unto us continuously. It's not that God doesn't speak to us or that our prayers aren't heard. It's just that we're not hearing the response. We're not hearing God when God speaks. We're not hearing the voice of God. But it's happening continuously. Somebody was talking about angels the other day and said, well, how do I know if angels are there? And I said, well, if you listen really intently, you will hear them because they are constantly speaking to you. It sounds like very melodious laughter to me, usually. So if there's a problem that I'm experiencing and I'm wanting to hear the angels, I'm wanting to experience the angels, I have to listen very intently to their voice. And there's always that beautiful, non-judgmental laughter that for me lets me know that angel is present, that those angels are present. And the same is true here, that the voice of God is constantly there, but the voice of God we experience in silence. Our God shall come and shall not keep silence. A fire shall devour before him. So in the silence itself that we hear the voice of God, God is never silent. I know that sounds like a dichotomy, but when you can quiet your mind and really listen intently to the words of the infinite intelligence, it never stops. It doesn't stop speaking to you. It doesn't keep silence. But it's within that silence that you hear that voice that is never silent. A fire shall devour before him. Now remember, we've brought a problem for transformation. We've brought a problem. So you think of those ancient alchemists, they always started out with some sort of original material, usually lead or something like that. And they would treat it and they would make it into something else. They would turn it into an alloy or something like that. They would transform it ultimately from a base metal into gold. Now only God can truly do that for us. But when God does that, a fire devours that which we bring before God. So if we have a problem that we are bringing before this power, then a tempestuous fire comes and devours us in order that we be transformed. It shall be very tempestuous round about him. So all around us, you're going to see evidence of this transformation, and you delight in the tempestuousness of it. You delight that things are changing. He shall call to the heavens from above and to the earth that he may judge his people. Now, God judges his people. Now, who are his people? God's people are God's thoughts. You are a thought in the mind of God, and God judges you consistently, constantly, never stops judging you. And that's good news, because God only judges rightly. God only judges you according to the way God creates you. And God creates you perfect. And so anything other than perfection, God's judging that as not being real. So that tempestuous fire is taking and burning away all of those things that are not of God. And that is God's judgment, and we want God's judgment. Gather my saints together unto me, those that have made a covenant with me by sacrifice. Okay, so now the saints of God are God's consecrated thought forms. That's what a saint is. And so a saint within your deep mind are the thought forms that you were created with. When you were created with a whole set of data. You were created with a whole software that never has to be upgraded, that is always permanently perfect. And that software are thoughts. And those thoughts of God are called saints in the Psalms. And those saints are constantly with you, constantly choosing for God, constantly working for God. Gather my saints unto me, those that have made a covenant with me by sacrifice. So making a covenant with God by sacrifice. A sacrifice, we're going to get into a little bit more later in this psalm, but a sacrifice is a gift to God. It's something that you're giving to God. And when you give to God, only that which is not being given in any situation is lacking. So if you're giving to God, that means that you're starting the conversation, because God's not going to attack you. God's not going to come in and say, okay, well, it's time to transform this problem. No, you've got to come to God. You've got to make the first step, the first move. And so by giving to God, giving a sacrifice, giving a gift unto God, you're starting the ball rolling. You're putting that ball into motion. And then God gathers his saints unto himself, meaning calls forth those thought forms that are already installed in you to come to the surface, to take charge of whatever the situation is. And the heavens shall declare his righteousness, for God is judge himself. So you don't have to worry about finding your own righteousness. You don't have to worry about, is this a good thought? Is that a bad thought? Is this something that's not up to you. You just have to give it all to the fire, this tempestuous fire of God. And God themselves in the heavens shall declare your righteousness. So God's judgment knows exactly where to look for the reality of who you are. And anything that doesn't look like your righteousness isn't really you. Has nothing to do with you. It might be something that you've become addicted to. It might be something that you've become accustomed to. It might be a habit that you have. But if it's not part of God, then it doesn't really exist for you. And therefore, we are asking God to take those things from us, to burn those things up in this tempestuous fire, so that we can thus be transformed and made new again. For God is judge himself, Selah. God is judge themselves. Now remember that God is not a he. God is pre-gender. God has no separation. God is oneness. God is infinite power, infinite presence, infinite love, infinite truth. Everything that is comes from God. And everything that is not only exists within the realm of a hallucination. And that hallucination is where our problems are. And so this fire burns away that hallucination so that only truth remains. Now, Selah says that we're going to stop and think for a minute, because now God starts to speak in the first person. Hear, O my people, and I will speak. O Israel, and I will testify against thee. Isn't that wonderful? So remember, Israel is a nation, but it's also the name of Jacob as a redeemed person. So when God did this operation for Jacob, God burned away all of Jacob's character defects and renamed Jacob as Israel. And that's who you are. And so what it's saying is, and because remember, everything in the Psalms or in the Bible represents you. It's nothing historic. It's nothing to think of outside of yourself. They're all aspects of your very own self. And where it says, hear, O my people, all of God's thoughts, and I will speak, O Israel, and I will testify against thee. So when God testifies against Israel, that means that anything that's not like God comes up to the surface to be removed. We want that. We want that testimony against Israel, meaning against anything that is existing in you that is not of Israel, that is not of God. It comes up to the surface to be removed. I am God, even thy God. So there's only one. When we're looking to God in a psalm, we're not looking, you got to remind yourself of this. We're not looking at a historic deity. We're not looking at an external deity. We're not looking at a personality. We are looking at the source of all life. Infinite intelligence, infinite life, infinite spirit, infinite soul, infinite truth, infinite love, infinite law, infinite presence. And that's what we're talking about, and that's what we're working with. I will not reprove thee for thy sacrifices or thy burnt offerings to have been continually before me. So what that is talking about is, remember how we talked about a sacrifice as a gift? Sometimes when we give gifts to God, we do things in order that we might manipulate a situation. We're like, well, if I give up smoking, then maybe God will be good to me. Or I promise God, if you give me this, then I'll do this. And those aren't true sacrifices, because you're not just giving for the giving's sake. You're not giving in order to get the ball rolling on your transformation. You're trying to make a deal. You're trying to make a bargain with God. Now, God's saying they're not going to reprove you for that. They're not going to make you wrong for that. So when you do that, it's not that you're bad, it's not that you're evil, but you're not really working at the level of transformation that the psalm is trying to get you. It says, I will take no bullock out of thy house, nor he-goats out of thy folds, for every beast of the forest is mine, and the cattle upon 1,000 hills. In other words, there's nothing that you can give to God that God doesn't already own. And if you're giving something to God that God doesn't already own, then you're giving something that doesn't ultimately really exist. So just give it. We want to give to God because that's the one power, the one source, the one substance, not because we're expecting some sort of barter. We're not expecting some sort of deal. It's not a transactional relationship that we have with the infinite. For every beast of the forest is mine, and the cattle upon 1,000 hills. Elsewhere, where God talks about the cattle on 1,000 hills, God's talking about, yeah, these things are mine and I'm giving them to you. So they're yours now. So everything that God has is yours. Everything that God has, God gives to you. God doesn't give you a couple things. God gives you everything. You get all of it. You get everything. And it's really important to remember that God gave you everything already. Now, if you're not receiving everything, that's not God's fault. That's our own limited capacity to receive and to feel worthy and all of those things. And that's another great use for this psalm, is to allow yourself to transform your own sense of reception, your own sense of receptivity and worthiness, so that you can receive and you can release all of those gifts into reality for yourself. I know all the fowls of the mountain and the wild beasts of the field are mine. So God already knows everything. Infinite intelligence knows everything. You don't have to, this is also talking about how you don't have to explain your problem to God. Isn't that how it always kind of works? Well, no, you don't understand, God. I have this problem. And God gives you something and you're like, yeah, I don't think you got this. It's not that, it's this. No, God gets it. God gets it. It's you that doesn't get it. So when you get the response back from God, when you get the resolution to your problem, you have to look at it as what it is, as the answer to your prayer, as the answer to the spell. Sometimes it doesn't look like the thing that you thought it was going to be, but it is exactly what you need. Exactly what you need. It says, if I were hungry, I would not tell thee, for the world is mine, and the fullness thereof. Will I eat the flesh of bulls? Will I drink the blood of goats? The same goes with praise the Lord. You don't praise the Lord because God needs your praise. God's feelings are going to get hurt if you don't give praise to God. You don't need to give gifts to God because God is hungry without your sacrifices. In the old ways of sacrificing, you would sacrifice food, right? Well, God doesn't need your food. And if God did need food, he wouldn't tell you about it. That's what this is saying. But God doesn't need your food. God doesn't need you to bring these things. But we need to offer gifts to God. We do. And so what we do when we're wise, and this psalm is kind of talking about this in a roundabout way, when we want to make our spells permanent, when we want to receive benefit, remember, giving and receiving are the same thing, but giving is the only thing that we really have power over and control over. So how do you give to God? How do you give to God? And what are you giving to God? Well, you want to give everything to God in order to receive everything. But you don't give to some theoretical force up in the sky. You give to God based on God's principles. You can give love where there's hatred. You can give joy where there's sadness. You can support somebody where they are not supported, right? You can give wherever there is lack in your experience. That's the kind of giving that God actually accepts, because God doesn't need your food. God doesn't need your empty praise. God needs you to give from your heart. Where there is a lack, you will find it and you will give it. Offer unto God thanksgiving. Now that's a great gift, isn't it? What are you grateful for? Don't be just grateful for things ambiguously. Oh, I'm so grateful for God. I'm so grateful for life. Be specific. What are you grateful for? What is the good in your life? That's God in action. That's what we're grateful for. That is true giving. And pay thy vows unto the Most High. To pay your vows unto the Most High is to keep the covenant. And the covenant, the ultimate covenant with God, is recognizing that cause and effect is the highest law. And therefore, if we have effects in our life that we don't like, that we are willing to change those causes. We are willing to change those causes. And that means that we're going to be steadfast and true about being clear about our actions and our intentions and our relationships with one another. We're not going to say one thing and do another. And call upon me in the day of trouble. That's the first thing. If you're having trouble, then you call upon God. You call upon infinite intelligence. You call upon the solution immediately. I will deliver thee. That's a promise. And thou shalt glorify me. And that's your promise. So to glorify God doesn't just mean, oh, God, you're great, because God doesn't need that. What God needs is you to put feet to your prayers and you to be consistent from what your desires are and what your actions are. The way that your integrity with other people and your integrity with yourself and doing what you say you're going to do, being where you say you're going to be, all of those things, that's how you repay. That's the real way that you give to God, is by being consistent. Those are paying your vows. But unto the wicked God saith, what hast thou to do to declare my statutes, or that thou shouldst take my covenant into thy mouth? Well, the wicked are those self-destructive thought forms where these problems are, right? And so God says to those thought forms, what have you to do to declare my statutes, or that thou shouldst take my covenant into your mouth? Seeing thou hatest instruction and casteth my words behind thee. Right? So if you don't jive with the original thought form that I gave, then you must be destroyed, because you're not real. You don't exist. We have to remind ourselves where it says, seeing thou hatest instruction and castest my words behind thee. When we get instruction from infinite intelligence, we follow it. We don't just say, oh, do this for me, and then go back and live our lives the same way. It's like with Jesus, where he would say, here you go. Here's the healing of your prayer. No, don't do that anymore. The thing that caused that, stop doing that. Don't keep coming back to me again and again and again to get healed when you're not going to change your ways. And the same thing goes here. When thou sawest a thief, then thou consentest with him, and hast been partaker with adulterers. Now, thieving and adultery, those things, in and of themselves, you could look at them as not such hot things. But what they represent is that you're doing one thing, saying one thing and doing another. Saying one thing and doing another. Thou givest thy mouth to evil, and thy tongue to frameth deceit. It's talking about you don't want to use your words counter to what you're asking for in the spell. Don't start talking up how bad everything is after you do the spell and expect everything to work out for you. Thou sittest and speakest against thy brother, thou slanderest thine own mother's son. Now, thine own mother's son doesn't just mean your personal brother. That means anyone in existence is your mother's son. Anyone on the face of the earth came from the same universal mother as you. Therefore, if you sit and talk and slander somebody, then you are actually going against the very thing that you say that you want in the spell. So you got to watch your words, it's saying. That's how powerful your words are. That's how powerful you are. Even God can't go up against your words. God's not powerful enough to go against God's own laws, because God's power comes from God's laws. Therefore, if God's laws say, as you speak, so it shall be, then that's going to be the way it is. So you don't come to a spell and say, oh, I want this, and I want that, and I want this, and nothing's ever working for me. Please make it work. And then things work out. And then you go back and you start using your words to slander other people and talk about how bad they are, especially the ones that you feel real justified about that, in that. These things hast thou done, and I kept silence. Thou thoughtest that I was altogether such an one as thyself, but I will reprove thee and set them in order before thine eyes. So just because you don't get an immediate response when you do something like talking smack about people, even though you don't get an immediate response, it doesn't mean that the universe didn't hear that. And it's saying, I will reprove thee and set them in order before thine eyes. If you keep coming back to the psalm and saying, I want healing with my problem, but I'm not going to stop using my words against myself and other people, God's going to eventually say, look, you say you want this, and the only way that I can show you how what you're doing is going counter to what you want is to make it even more evident why what you're doing with your mouth and what you're doing with your words is wrong. And that's the reproach that you're going to get. And you want that because you've asked for it. It's not God punishing you. It's God showing you exactly what you're asking for. You want transformation. You want things to work out for you. So you either stop misusing your words or God will show you why. Because you asked for that. Lest I tear you in pieces and there be none to deliver. Now that's just a very dramatic way of saying that, using the image of a lion, how a lion tears his prey into pieces. That's what God's going to do to your problems. That's what God is doing to all of those thought forms which are at odds with who you are in truth. That's what God's judgment looks like from the point of view of those negative thought forms. But if you're really bound to those negative thought forms, if you really self-identify with each of those thought forms, especially as they result in this psalm in using your speech so negatively, it's going to seem as though God's tearing you to pieces, when that's not really what's happening. It's that you're at odds with your intention here. You say, I want transformation, but I'm misusing my words. You're going to get the results of that. And you want that. You want that because then you can say, oh, that's right. I remember once I was doing something very similar to this, and I was going on and on and on about some poor woman, and I was out in the middle of nowhere in the mountains. Of all places for this person to be, she was in the table in this restaurant right behind me, and she heard every little word that I said. And you know what? That was exactly what I needed. I needed to be shown. See, look how powerful your words are. And see what you did? You hurt yourself and you hurt her, and let's stop doing that. So that was me being torn into pieces because I needed that. I had to have that because I kept saying, I want magic, but I'm not willing to give up the stuff that's going against magic. And so eventually I had to be shown the dissonance there. I had to be shown, which one do you want there, Ariel? Because you can't have it both ways. Whoso offereth praise, glorify me, and to him that ordereth his conversation aright, I will show the salvation of God. Simple, isn't it? You get your words in order, and if your words start to really back up what you say you want. And that doesn't just mean your words about that topic. That means your words in general, how you're using your speech. If you set your conversation aright, you will have the salvation of God. You will have everything work out for you. But that's up to you. That's up to you, whether you want to make that kind of a sacrifice where you're giving up all of your gossip, you're giving up all of your slander, you're giving up all of your negative conversation, you're giving up all of your desire to talk poorly about other people, even though in objective reality you may have a lot of evidence to support how they deserve that. But it's not about them. It's about you. So you got to put your money where your mouth is, literally. And if you want this problem to be transformed, it's time to take responsibility for your words. If you come back to the psalm every single day, you'll feel a little click. And that click is a sense that there's peace and there's certainty about the situation at hand. And when you get that sense of peace and certainty, you know that your spell is done. It's taken. You don't need to work on that anymore. In fact, it's best if you just leave it alone and you move off of it and you go on to something else. Thank you for spending a little time with me today. I really appreciate you. Until next time, blessed be.